How we doing, everybody? This is Bobby Gaines. Been talking about the Celtics for a number of years now. Actually have YouTube videos dating back to the 2013-14 season when the Celtics had, just basically blown it up. Pierce and Garnett were, traded to the Nets. It was, rebuilding time for the Celtics. And, of course, anyone who watched my channel, of course, a million other videos came out, but I'd always have some kind of reaction to the Celtics, 2014, 15, 15, 16, and so on. And this has been a long rebuilding process, but that's actually what makes this finals to me, and I know they haven't won it, and I actually don't think they're going to win it, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it's made this whole finals thing for 2022 just that much more satisfying. And I loved, funny enough, my first year as a Celtics fan, where I really watched the team was 2008 with the big three: Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce. I had watched them a little bit before that, but my first memories of the Celtics in a positive way was obviously that championship, and then again in 2010 when they win. So I was invested in the Celtics for a few years leading up to, Pierce and Garnett not retiring but getting traded. And, so I was kind of I wasn't angry, but I think a lot of you remember my mood at the time. I was like, what are the Celtics going to do? They're just going to have a bunch of random players. They're going to keep trading them. Rondo was their best player at one point. I think 2014 or whatever, the year that they were they were lousy. I think they won 20 games that year or whatever. Brad Stevens' first year. And then Brad Stevens was another one. I'm like, who's Brad Stevens? Who's this guy? This is stupid. What are we trying to do? And, typical Boston fan. That's me. I'm not even from Boston, but may as well be. But yeah, so for many years it was, Celtics, need to make more trades. Why aren't they doing anything? They're just whatever. And surprisingly, it was one trade, in my opinion, and again, we all know the history, but one trade I think kind of started to turn things, and it was fairly early in the process, and it was no one that's on the team now but Isaiah Thomas. I forget the year. I think it might have been 2015 when they got him toward the end of the season, or at that trade deadline. I remember saying even then, this feels like a trade to actually make the team better. And it was the first time I had seen that at that point in 2 years. Now, they did draft Marcus Smart. That was the one big piece. And one thing that I remember, because I listened to a lot of Boston sports radio, and when this whole thing was going on, how are you going to make the Celtics good again, whatever. And, a lot of people wondered, are any of the players from this team even going to be on the next really great Celtics team? And I think Marcus Smart's the only one that I can think of. Horford, because Horford was kind of part of the early rebuild, if you call it that. When they got Al Horford, I remember that was a big deal. Horford was, not a superstar, but an all-star player. The whole thing, free agents don't want to come to Boston. So Horford was kind of the beginning of okay, the Celtics are actually trying to improve the team. And of course, we know what happened from there. A year or two later, they got Jaylen Brown, then they got Jason Tatum. And it's just funny to think now this was all 5 or 6 years ago. And so, I don't know why I'm going through the history. You guys already know how the Celtics got to this point. But it's very interesting to me, as somebody who's watched the Celtics all these years and watched them go from literally a 20-win team to a 40-win team to a 45-win team. To me, it doesn't usually happen like this, especially in the NBA. Usually you see a team will just suck. The 76ers will suck for 5 or 6 years. Eventually they'll hit on somebody, which they did. They hit on a couple players, actually. And, Joel Embiid, and they built their team in maybe a year. They went from being a 20-win team to a 50-win team, Now, who knows where they're going to go, but, that was the Sixers. Heck, even look at the Nets, the team that the Celtics, had that trade with for the draft picks. People thought the Nets were going to be bad for years. And yeah, they were bad for a few years, but then they just signed, they happened to sign Kyrie Irving from the Celtics and Kevin Durant. And, now they're they were finals contenders, or thought to be. And, how the whole thing goes. But to me, it's just the building, the rebuild for the Celtics was such a weird, straight upward line. I know there were a couple downs, but really, it's almost remarkable to see it, that they really did go from a bottom of the barrel team, and they weren't bottom as long as I thought. I mean, I thought it was one of these things, you see some teams struggle for 5-10 years. Celtics were a bad team for a year, 2 years maybe, and not that they were ever great, but I remember that year with I think it was the first year they got Horford, actually. Horford, Isaiah Thomas, a bunch of role players, Jay Crowder, that whole gang. I know they didn't win the championship. They made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. They got smoked by LeBron, but I like that team. Like, I liked the not as good Celtics, the 45-win Celtics, the 51-win Celtics, whatever it was. It's like they would go from, you know, and then they actually had a year. I guess if there was a bump in the road, it was ironically when they got Kyrie Irving. They went from being, kind of this, up and coming team to holy crap, they just got Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward. It looked like, maybe the next big three, They were going to, they had Tatum was young and Brown was there. It was like, oh, this is going to be like the best team. It's got, 2 All-Stars and a bunch of really good players. And then Hayward, of course, blows out his ankle that first game of the season. I shouldn't be laughing about it. It was actually a terrible injury. But that was kind of the end of it, really, before it began. Although I think that was the team that actually went to the Eastern Conference Finals again and almost beat the Cavaliers without Kyrie Irving, if I'm remembering that correctly. But we never really saw the full power of that team, if there was one. The Gordon Hayward, Kyrie Irving years, because Kyrie Irving was good that year, but you didn't have Gordon Hayward. They had a really good record, I remember, which is why they had home court advantage against the Cavaliers in the playoffs, but they ultimately lost it in 7. And then the next year, you did have Kyrie Irving back, but Hayward just never felt like himself, at least not that year. I think he averaged like 10 points a game or something. Like, he was off. He was, recovering from the ankle injury. It was a gruesome injury. And then Kyrie Irving left. They got Kemba Walker. Hayward was actually pretty good, I think. His last year as a Celtic, I think it was like 2020 or whatever. I actually thought he was pretty good. Like, I didn't think he was great, but I thought he was closer to what you expected from Gordon Hayward. Kemba Walker was pretty good, so, I mean, that's probably the closest we got to see that duo. Then, of course, Tatum and Brown and Marcus Smart and all them. It's been crazy. And really, I thought it was over. You guys might remember me in 2020 basically saying, like, this was a waste of time, we got rid of Isaiah Thomas, we got this guy, we got rid of him, we got rid of this guy, Kemba Walker's not good enough. This was literally 2 years ago when the Celtics lost to the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals again. It was like, we just cannot get past the Eastern Conference Finals. Not that that's a bad thing, like, most teams don't make it to the Conference Finals, but it was just, like, 2 years ago, not even, like, 2 years ago. I'm like, I'm done with the Celtics, this is stupid, they can't beat anybody, it doesn't matter where they go, they can't beat them. Tatum and Brown are good, but that's it. And, 2021, with last year, with Brad Stevens last year as the coach, they lost to the Nets. They got blown out, and I'm like, okay, so, you got these first-round picks, from the Nets, and the whole thing was you're going to build something, and the Nets are going to look stupid because they blew their team up. But then the Nets got Durant and Irving, and now you look stupid. So that was my feeling last year. So this season, I honestly had no expectations for this team. I thought they were going to be a 6 or 7 seed. I thought they were going to be okay, but not great. And it looked like I was going to be right because they started the season like 25 and 25 or whatever. I mean, that's 50 games. That's not like a month. That's a lot of the season. And then, of course, we know what happened. Celtics, not just Tatum and Brown, the whole team looked really, really good. Great defense, blowing teams out, not just, all the teams, not just the bad teams. They took care of business. And it's kind of funny. It's satisfying in a way that teams like the Lakers and the Nets who, basically built their teams by just getting superstars. The Lakers were another example of a team that was down and out, and then they got LeBron and AD and, the biggest players they could get, To me, what the Celtics did, and what they're still doing, because we don't know what's going to happen, but, like, what the Celtics did, and maybe I'm just biased because I am a Celtics fan, like, to me that took a lot more effort. It took a lot more heart. It took a lot of people probably had to sacrifice, like, players, coaches, whatever, like, kind of sacrifice their status to be in a winning position, if that makes sense. Like, a lot of teams, will go for the home run, as we're seeing. Or you got Philadelphia with the process. They try to get the biggest players by losing, which, yeah, it kind of worked. You had the Toronto Raptors, who did win a championship by getting Kawhi Leonard. And these are all moves I wanted the Celtics to make, by the way. Or some of them, anyway. Jimmy Butler, who we just saw with the Heat, who is a great player, by the way. Jimmy Butler was a player that I always wanted to come to the Celtics. It seemed like every year they were in trade talks for Paul George or Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has, I mean, even though they didn't win this year, I'd say Jimmy Butler was probably worth the money for the Heat. I still wish the Celtics had gotten him, but Paul George, I mean, again, I'm sure I would not mind having Paul George on my team, but it just seems like he has not been what was expected in Oklahoma City or the LA Clippers. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. My point is, like, to see teams like the Nets and the Lakers be at home now. The Lakers didn't even make the playoffs. The Nets got blown out by the Celtics. Not blown out, because actually a couple of those games are close, but It's really weird. It's really weird to me. I mean, I've appreciated this process. I know I've been angry at times. In fact, I've been angry more than I've been happy, which is why I'm kind of doing this rant to be like, this isn't the end. In fact, I feel kind of optimistic about this because I feel like this is the beginning of something. And I think it's fitting that they're going against the Golden State Warriors because back in 2014-15, I mean, that was literally, or somewhere around there, the first year of Golden State's dominance. That was, the Golden State Warriors beating the Cleveland Cavaliers for what would be the first of 4 finals with that matchup. And then they played the Raptors. Golden State was in the finals every year, it seemed like. And, that was everybody's framework for how to win in the NBA. And so as a Celtics fan, it was always can we, meaning the Celtics, be the Warriors? There are plenty of teams, like I mentioned, like the Raptors, Lakers, whatever, that can make a run for a year, maybe 2 years. But could the Celtics be the Warriors? Could they get, a collection of players? Because the Warriors' big three, I mean, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green. I don't know about Klay Thompson. He might have been with another team first. But I know Steph Curry was drafted by the Warriors. Draymond Green, I'm pretty sure, was drafted by the Warriors. Most of their core, even some of the younger players like Jordan Poole, they were drafted by the team. Andrew Wiggins was a trade, but I mean, most of the players on the Warriors today and the ones that won the championships were with the Warriors, as kids, as prospects. So, the goal obviously is to be the Warriors. That's not an easy thing to do because the Warriors won, I think, 4 titles in 5 years or 6 years, whatever it was. That was kind of the blueprint. And now the Celtics are playing the team that, 6 years ago, it looked like it was impossible you'd ever reach the Warriors, You were the Celtics, Back then they didn't have anybody. Even when they had Isaiah Thomas, it's okay, whatever. And now the Celtics are playing that team. Now, I understand that team is older now. They're not, they don't have Durant. They don't have all the superstars they had, but they still have Steph Curry. They're still going to be, I still think they're going to win the series, quite honestly. The Warriors are. But to me, it's kind of an interesting turn of events that I do believe, and again, this might age poorly. I might look back at this in a couple of years and go, what was I thinking? I do think the Celtics are on the cusp of becoming, maybe not the next Warriors, but the next, dominant team. The next team that, if you want to get to the championship, you have to go through Boston. Again, this is going to look really bad if they finish as the 8th seed next year, but living in this moment, this feels different. They've had Tatum and Brown for 4 or 5 years. It doesn't feel like it, but Tatum and Brown have been around a little while, and they're still really young. Marcus Smart, surprisingly, I thought by now he'd be traded just because it seems like they trade everybody at a certain point. And maybe he will be, but Marcus Smart's been kind of the tough, kind of heart of the team, obviously. Al Horford coming back, I thought that was just kind of a move just to make a move, but apparently he's really made a difference. And then, of course, the other periphery pieces they have, I mean, yeah, not everybody on that list I just rattled off is sustainable, but at least for the next 3-4 years, I mean, you could see Tatum and Brown at least, and then, Horford, whoever, they're going to have to plug some things in, get some more defensive players. Robert Williams, I forgot to mention him, Robert Williams Jr., great player, I mean, for what the Celtics need. Because not everybody's going to be the top scorer on the team, but you need, a tough defender, especially guy down low to get blocks, which is why you got Robert Williams. It's they really did think of everything. Imagine that. Me as a stupid Celtics fan, I'm just get Durant, get Curry, get the most expensive players. But no, the Celtics did it the way that I never thought it could be done, which is by drafting. The free agents they got, ironically, didn't really pan out, with the exception of maybe Horford, but, Hayward didn't pan out. Kyrie Irving was a trade that, funny enough, the Kyrie Irving trade didn't really hurt the Celtics as much as people thought. You got 2 years of Kyrie Irving. He was, good. But, you gave up Isaiah Thomas, who nobody could have predicted Isaiah Thomas's career would go down the way it did, which I actually feel bad about. Because I loved Isaiah Thomas as a Celtic, and he hasn't really done anything. He's been injured. I mean, that's why. It's not because he stinks, but it's just that he's been on 10 different teams, it seems like, since he was with the Celtics. So, you wish him all the best. My point is, when you made that trade with Brooklyn, or with Cleveland for Kyrie, you gave up Isaiah Thomas, and I think, one of the Brooklyn picks, I forget who they even took with that pick, but the Celtics, I mean, yeah, you gave up those 2 pieces for Kyrie Irving. To me, it's a wash, because Kyrie Irving's not with the Celtics anymore, Isaiah Thomas isn't with the Cavs anymore, and even when they were both with those teams, it didn't really do anything, is what I'm saying. So, even that one, risky move didn't really set you back. And I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just saying I'm excited the Celtics are in the finals. I do want to wrap this up by making a prediction, which is Warriors in 6. I know in my video I said, we're going to get destroyed by the Warriors, all that crap. I don't think they're going to get destroyed, but ultimately I do think they lose. I think, and again, I'm also basing this off the fact that it took them like 5 conference finals appearances to finally make the finals. I'm like, do you really just make the finals and then win it instantly? Because it's always been slow with the Celtics. It's always been make the first round, make the second round, make the third round. Yeah, are they just going to make the finals now and that's it? They're just going to, run away with it? I don't think so. I think if the Celtics do win, it's going to be like in a 7-game series. And I think if they lose, it could be in 5 or 6. I honestly think the Warriors, they're not afraid to go on the road and win. I know the argument against the Warriors this year is they haven't had to play anybody. They didn't have to play the Suns in the West, but I don't know. The Warriors, I trust them to get it done. I know they lost in 2019 to the Raptors, but we'll see what happens, obviously. And I'm going to have reaction to the games. Maybe not every game, but we'll see. Depending on what happens, obviously. I'll be here. Really, at this point, the only way the Celtics could really disappoint me is if they get swept and they get blown out in every game. As long as they're competitive in every game, whatever the outcome ends up being, I'm already more than pleased with the season, which I know you guys know. That's not something I say often. Basically, if my teams don't win the championship, I usually go, you guys sucked. Although I think I gave the 2021 Red Sox some props even after they didn't win, but I digress. 2021 Red Sox were a weird thing. But this Celtics team has already exceeded my expectations. Granted, if they didn't make the finals, I'd be fucking pissed because I even said that in this series. They worked too hard. They beat, in my opinion, 2 of the best teams in the league, even though Brooklyn had their issues. Off the court, I think Brooklyn was still one of the best teams in the league. The Bucks were the defending champions, and it seems like the Celtics always have trouble beating the Bucks. And the Heat also give the Celtics trouble, but I feel like you had to beat the Heat this time. Sorry, Miami Heat fans, but you had to beat them this time. Losing to LeBron and losing to Kevin Durant and losing to whoever, that happens once in a while, or more than once in a while. But the loss of the Heat a couple years ago still stings, and I did not want to do that again. And they almost did lose that Game 7. But you know what? They're here now. Let's see what they do. Let's go Celtics. Again, super proud to be a Celtics fan today. Let's go Celtics against the Warriors starting, tomorrow. Hey.